All right, so since you have your Bibles, getting better at it, go ahead and turn over to Romans chapter 1. And I'm going to actually do something that I'm not necessarily known for, but we're going to jump around a little bit tonight, both in Romans and in the book of Acts. And once again, this is going to be a teaching/preaching lesson. We noted this morning that God's power has been displayed in the gospel. And Paul lays this out in Romans chapter 1 because he notes that he's been set apart for the gospel, and that this gospel, there are three things about it. The first thing was that it was promised beforehand by the prophets and the Holy Scriptures. That as you look into the Old Testament, all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, as God lays down promises to both man, the woman, and the serpent, he promises the serpent that the seed of woman would crush his face, is the Dean Meadows translation there. That was promised beforehand, and that in Jeremiah 31:31, God said, I'm going to make a new covenant, not like the one that I had with the house of Israel and Judah. It'll be different. And then we also see that it was, number one, that it was promised beforehand, and that it was concerning his son, that God was going to send Jesus, his son, and that he would come through the lineage of David, which is noted in two places. Number one, Luke's account, right? Luke gives the legal genealogy of Jesus, and in Matthew's account, he gives the royal genealogy of Jesus, as he breaks that down into three groups of 14, before the Babylonian captivity, during the Babylonian captivity, and after the Babylonian captivity. So one, hey, this gospel is important, and this gospel is has been promised beforehand by the prophets and the Holy Scriptures. Also, that the Son and the Messiah would come through David, the one who would preach that gospel, and also that it would be declared through the power of the resurrection. And that the gospel certainly was declared through the power of the resurrection. It said this morning, if you say that you're going to die and rise from the grave 3 days later, and you do it, you got me sold. Right? I'm with you. And so we noted also that because of this, that this gospel, the power of it, Paul and the apostles received grace and their calling and their commission to bring about the obedience of faith both in the Gentiles but also in you and me as well. And that attached to this is the obligation, as Paul talks about, the obligation to preach that gospel and the obligation to share that gospel with all people. He says to the Jew first and to the Gentile. And that he's eager to do this. It's not like Paul walked around and said, yes, I have to. Right? Paul said, I'm eager to get to Rome because I want to preach this gospel. And so what we see from this in the letter to the Romans is that Paul systematically walks through a couple of things. One, that everybody, the power of the gospel, or God's power is seen in the gospel, and the fact that, number one, everybody, all time, all places is sinned. Remember, this morning we talked about the two factions in Rome, the Jews and the Gentiles. Well, what Paul does is he actually stresses unity to this group. And the first place that he draws unity is, I find it kind of funny, he goes, you're all unified in the fact that you've all sinned. You're all unified in the fact that you've all fallen short of the glory of God. He notes in Romans chapter 1 for the Gentiles that they worshipped in their paganism, they worshipped the created rather than the Creator, and they fell short. And then he comes back in Romans chapter 2, and he talks about the Jews who say, hey, you call yourself a Jew and you rely on the law and you boast in God, but do you who preach do not steal? Do you steal? The indication there is, yes, I know for a fact that there are Jewish Christians in the Roman church who are preaching don't steal, but steal. Right? And so as he moves through this letter from chapter 1 to chapter 11 is the theological aspect of Romans. He's saying, hey, this is the big theological stuff that you need to concern yourself with that displays and shows and proves that God's power has been seen and been on display through the gospel. But in chapter 12, In chapter 12, Paul now is going to look at the practical side of things. Not only has God revealed his power in the gospel, right? But you also, as Christians, reveal God's power in sharing the gospel and being unified. And so the focus that he takes really in chapter 12, and a lot of chapter 12, is this idea, in chapter 12, chapter 13, and chapter 14, is this idea that the church is not about an individual, but about individuals. Plural. That the church is not about an individual, but it's about individuals. And so in Romans chapter 12, note he starts Romans chapter 12 with, I appeal to you therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as what? A living sacrifice. So this is the first question for tonight. What does it mean to be a living sacrifice? Because those are two contradictory terms. A sacrifice is something that you kill, and it can't live. So what in the world does it mean to be a living sacrifice?
Dead in the world.
Okay, dead to the world, right? We see multiple places in Scripture about the difference between belonging to the world and belonging to Christ. James would say you can't be friends with, because being friends with the world is enmity with God, right? So hey, absolutely. One of that is, hey, not being friends with the world, okay? What else? That too. No. Hey, alive for Christ. Right? Alive for Christ. So living part is the moral aspect of, the orientation of my heart is the living aspect. So what's the sacrificial part?
There's always something else I could be doing.
Very good, Milton. There's always something else that I could be doing. Right? Which indicates what?
I gave up something to be with.
Hey, I gave up something, or I am still giving up things, right, to maintain that relationship with God. Go ahead.
Would the sacrificial part be persecution also?
It could be. It could be. I mean, Jesus certainly tells his disciples that, hey, there's no greater love than this, than for a man to lay down his life for his friends. Absolutely. Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 1, hey, save your fork, the best is yet to come, even though now you might be tested by fire. And there's some commentators that say that at that time, what Peter's referencing is the idea that Nero would take Christians, put them on crosses at night, and set them on fire and have like a watch party. So it's something that, because that's a phrase that's only seen in Peter and in 1 Peter during the time of Nero. So that's where they would get that. Okay, what else? A living sacrifice. Go ahead, Joel.
I'd say die to self.
Die to self, right?
We hear that in the scriptures.
Yeah, Jesus says, pick up your cross
Yep.
and follow me, which is another weird phrase that Jesus would use for that time frame. Because to pick up the cross in the Roman culture would mean what? You're about to die. So wait, you want me to pick up my cross and go to die and follow you? Right? So that's a good point. Hey, I'm picking up and I'm dying to self in order to follow Jesus. That's what it means to be a living sacrifice. If you are a Christian, but you're not giving up anything to be a Christian, then odds are you may not be following the command of being a living sacrifice. Right? It could be that you're content with having one foot in the world and one foot in a relationship with Jesus. All right. So notice what he says here, and this goes to what Steve talked about this morning. Notice it says there that this is holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual, what's the word there? Reasonable worship. So there's a word there that can either mean reasonable or it can be used for worship. Some other translations have service. So there is an end goal to being this living sacrifice. It's to offer yourself consistently and daily to follow after the upward call of Jesus Christ. Now, notice the contrary, what Paul says here in verse 2. Don't, what? Be conformed to the world, right? So it's the contrast between what it means to be a living sacrifice and also the contrast of what it means to conform to the world. So what does it mean to conform? What's the difference between being conformed and being transformed? Isn't that just a distinction without really a difference?
Renewing of the mind.
Okay? Part of it is a renewing of the mind, correct. But what's the difference between conforming to something and then or being transformed?
Water conforms to whatever shape it's in.
Okay?
And then transformed when you change.
Okay, so water, as Ray talked about, water will take whatever shape that it's in. Whereas to transform means to change completely and totally. Right? And so what he's saying is, and I'll piggyback off Ray's analogy because that's not in the notes. Good job, Ray. Thanks. Hey, don't take the shape of the world just because you're in it. Don't take the shape of the world just because you're in it. Which would be the easiest way. I mean, and that's a good point, Mike. Sometimes we'll hear in the religious world or on TV that if you become a Christian, everything's going to get easier. Actually, what we see in the New Testament is those who became Christians actually had it harder. Go ahead, Shannon.
Quick question. I'm just wondering about when in verse 4 in Romans 1 says, declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection of the dead. So they refer strictly to Jesus' resurrection of the examples of Jesus and the apostles. Probably other people that they raised from the dead.
He's strictly speaking about Jesus because that also refers to Jesus being the descendant of David. So he's strictly talking about the gospel's power has been on display because it was prophesied about, that it had to do with the Son of God, and that it was confirmed by the resurrection. Those are the 3 points he's making there. So, yeah. No, that's fine. Do what? Oh, okay. Gotcha. Now, where is it? I just lost this one. Okay, here we are, verse 3. So, we're continuing verse 2, actually. It says there, don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed, right, by the renewal of the mind. Renewal of the mind. A famous cliche that I've heard is this, is that the heart will not accept what the mind rejects. The heart will not accept what the mind rejects. What does that mean? Is that if it doesn't make sense here, if this isn't penetrated, right, and this isn't convinced, right, and this isn't changed here, if you don't have a change here, you won't have a change here. And that's why Paul says the renewing of your mind. Remember, the Bereans in Acts, what did they do? They searched the scriptures daily to see if what was being taught was true. See if what was being taught was true. Why? Because they wanted to not only test what was being true, but if it was true, they wanted it to impact their mind, the way that they thought about things, which would then impact the heart, which for the Jewish time was the thing that he said was the decision maker. And so that was the thing that they would reference to, how one lived their life. How one lived their life. And so all of those things are part of following after the gospel. Following after the gospel. Now, if you notice, if you see in verse 9, it says there, so he's talked about the renewal and the transformation of the mind, not being conformed to the world. But notice also, he says there, let love be genuine. Let love be genuine. Now, why would Paul have to say this to a group of Christians that were in Rome, that were along the lines of Jew-Gentile? Why would he have to say that? Okay, so the hypocrisy, all right. In what way? In what way?
Outward compared to inward.
Yeah, outward compared to inward, right? It would be like one of the Jewish brothers going up to a Gentile brother and just saying, I just want to let you know, I love you. And then going over here to his Jewish friends and saying, that guy's a jerk. Right? I mean, that's essentially, think about in Galatians chapter, I think it's either chapter 1 or chapter 2, where Paul went up to Jerusalem to meet with the apostles. And what happened? What happened there is that Peter, when he was around the Gentiles, acted like who? A Gentile. But when James and the boys came down, what did he do? I got to get away from these nasty, filthy Gentiles. And Paul, it says there, rebuked him to his face. Basically said, hey, what's up with that? Why in the world would you act like a Gentile around Gentiles, and when the Jews come down, act like you don't even know who these people are? Right? So the idea of Paul saying let love be genuine means that love can be not genuine. It can be a facade. But notice a couple verses before that. Notice a couple verses before that as he talks about the members there. Right? For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same what? Function. So sandwiched between transform your mind and let love be genuine is a conversation about members. Is a conversation about the body of Jesus Christ. Right? That the body should have its mind transformed, but also it should have genuine love. Now, if we reference 1 Corinthians, we can see that sometimes in the church in the first century, there was a competition going on about who had what gift. I can speak in tongues. Woohoo! I'm better than you, even though you prophesy. Right? We see that in 1 Corinthians 12, 13, and 14. And so Paul comes back to remind them, notice he doesn't say there's one member that does everything. He says there are multiple members with different functions. Right? So what does that speak to? That speaks to the idea that number one, God understands that you and I are not the same. Shocker. I would be scared if you guys were like me. That'd be kind of weird. And y'all all be crazy. But hey, shocker. People are made differently. People have different skills, talents, abilities, and orientations of what they can and will do for the benefit of the church. So what does that mean? That means, as a preacher, right, I can't expect every single person I come across, every single guy that I come across, I can't expect him to go out and be a preacher. It just makes sense. There's no way. That'd also be like if one of our song leaders said to every new family member or new family that came in here and placed a membership, they went right up to the guy and said, all right, the expectation here, let's say 5 new families join tomorrow, it would be wrong for the song leaders to go over to the men and say, every one of you must be a song leader. Now, they might have not heard that person sing ever, or even know if they even can lead. Right? So what Paul's speaking to here is, and he gets to this in chapter 14 about things about opinions, is that you have a different function than person B, C, and D. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes we get caught up in, who's got the spotlight on them, right? And there's some people, especially in, maybe in the Roman church, definitely in the Corinthian church, who said, because I have the spotlight on me, I'm infinitely more valuable in the operation of the church and in the eyes of God than this person over here. We talked about an individual a couple of weeks ago in Exodus named Hur. And hers a him, by the way. But after that battle with the Amalekites, we don't hear anything else about her. We don't. And so he says there's all members, but not all the members have the same function. So we, though many, are one body and individually members of one another. So you're not, as a member of the Church of Christ, you're not supposed to be an island unto yourself. Right? Because the church isn't about an individual, it's about individuals. Right? It's about individuals. You're not an island to yourself. Right? Verse 6. Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them in prophecy, in proportion to our faith, in service, in our serving, and the one who teaches in his teaching, the one who exhorts in his exhortation, the one who contributes in his generosity, the one who leads with zeal, the one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness. Now let me ask you a question. Where does it say on there, elder, preacher, or deacon? It doesn't. Notice it talks about generosity being a gift. That some people, their purpose for the church, and it's not talking about money. It's not just talking about money. That some people have been blessed, right, and have the orientation of their heart to just be natural givers of time, of energy, and stuff. And he says, hey, if that's your function, if that's your gift, if that's what you're good at, if that's the orientation of who you are and what your heart's after, then what? Do it generously. Shannon.
Scriptures, Matthew where it says, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall see God. Blessed are the all this different thing. You see the same thing here. All these different things mentioned
It's Romans chapter 12, starting in verse 5.
All the things I mentioned, some people might be better at teaching, but still teach. Might be better at the interpretation, but
Yeah.
you know, that we all will be mourning. We all blessed those who mourn, blessed those who are persecuted. That applies to all, and these all apply to all, in one way or another.
In one way or another, yeah. Now notice, look at this. The one who leads with zeal. Yeah, the one who leads with zeal. The one who does acts of mercy. Notice this. With cheerfulness. That Paul says that there's some people in Rome whose gift for the kingdom is to provide mercy to people who need mercy. You ever thought about that? I mean, usually when we talk about, gifts, we think about, okay, well, tongues is gone, supernatural knowledge is gone, all those things in 1 Corinthians are gone. But these things right here, these are non-miraculous gifts. These aren't like tongues. This isn't like prophecy. These are things that everybody at the Church of Rome has one of these gifts. And we might have a conversation after this, but everybody at the Church of Gastonia Church of Christ has one of these gifts. Yeah, go ahead.
Mindset.
Mhm.
I've seen it happen any number of times in my years as a Christian. Someone might say, well, I could never teach class. But once they try,
Once they
given
start,
the opportunity,
yeah.
I've seen several become excellent.
Yeah. No, I agree. And sometimes in order to discover what my gift to the kingdom is, it's going to require me and you to do this. You see this right here? That's a box. It's going to require me to step outside of my box. Because until I step outside of that box, I really don't know what I'm capable of doing. Shocker, Marine story. When we got down to the end of boot camp, and they woke us up at 3 o'clock in the morning to do a 10-mile hike with about 60 pounds a year on my back. And they said, for the next 52 hours, you're going to be doing this and you'll get 2 hours of sleep. I was like, no way. Not a chance. But what? They knew something that I didn't. They had seen it done over and over and over again, and that with the right push, and believe it or not, drill instructors can be encouraging.
They have a way with people.
Do what?
They have a way with people.
They have a way with people. We found out that we could. We found out we could. But we had to, you know, and at any point, it's not like the drill instructor is going to make you go do it. If you say, I'm not doing it, I quit, they say, all right, you're out of the Marine Corps. Right? So it's not like they force you to do it. And they give you motivation to do it. They don't force you to do it. And that's the way that I think some people's spiritual gifts are. Is that they need the encourager to come by, the leader whose gift is to lead. He would come by and say, just try it. I mean, what was it? And I'll quote Dabo Sweeney on this. The only disability in life is a bad attitude. And what Paul is talking to people here is it's not about an individual, it's about individuals who have these different functions but are members of one another who, when they utilize those God-given talents and abilities, can do what? They can express the gospel message to people and also show people the powerful working of God in that. That's why sandwiched in between this is one, the call for the transformed mind, right? But then, as he moves through this section and talks about these spiritual gifts, the very next thing he says is, oh, by the way, even though it's not about an individual, it's about individuals, and even though it's not about one gift but multiple gifts, and even though you're members of one another, remember this: let your love be genuine. Let your love be genuine. Go ahead and move over to Acts chapter 2. This is something that each and every time that I read it, I'm in awe of the first century church. So, we see here that something amazing happens as the first gospel sermon is preached, right? It starts out, they're in the upper room, right? Tongues of fire come down. The naysayers say, they're just drunk. You know, they're just intoxicated. And Peter says, there's no way that that's possible because it's only 9 o'clock in the morning. And then he says, hey, what's going on here is what's been prophesied by Joel. Not this Joel, right? But Joel in the Bible. Ba-dooch. There you go. There's your joke for the day. And basically, what happens is a bunch of Jews are convinced that they killed Jesus. A bunch of Jews are convinced that they killed Jesus, that they killed the one. I mean, think about that for a second. I just realized that I killed the one who I've been looking for, who our ancestors had been looking for and talked about for the entirety of our civilization. And so they're converted. And here's the thing, and this is something that doesn't necessarily resonate with us because Christianity's been around for 2,000 years. But what do you do when you're a new faith group on the block in Rome? Where do you go? What church building do you go to? Where do you go? That's a very good question. Where do we go? Where do we go? And what do you do? What do you do now that 3,000 souls have been added to the church? What do you do? Where do you go? How do you operate? How do you function? How do you do that? That's a question. How do you do that? What do you do? I mean, what would you do? I mean, let's just think about it for a second. Just bear with me. Let's say, all of a sudden, and this is just hypothetical for everybody in the camera, everybody here, hypothetical, God reveals something to all of us, something new about Christianity, and says, hey, this is something new about Christianity. I want you to go out there and I want you to preach it. So we're brand new, we're on the block. What do? Good question. What do you do? And so you have a group of people here. There is no established Christian faith in Rome. There isn't. And notice what takes place here. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, right? And to the breaking of bread. So what's interesting here is in language is that there's a break between fellowship and the breaking of the bread. Seems to indicate that the breaking of the bread is different, is a different call to action than the fellowship. So one of the first things that takes place here is they decide that they're going to devote themselves to the apostles' teaching, but then what are they going to do? They're going to get together. They're going to get together. That's what a community does. Whether it's whether the new kids on the block, bad boy band, by the way, or it's 2,000 years later, and they're the predominant, quote, faith of a country. They devote themselves to the apostles' teaching, and they fellowship. And Milton did an excellent lesson the other day on fellowship. And notice, and awe came upon every soul, as many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles, and all who believed were together. Right? Different, there might be an individual here, and there might be an individual there with a different talent here and a different talent there. But what? They, as individuals, were together. They were together and had what? All things in common. Why? Because they had a transformed mind and their love was genuine. Doesn't matter what skills, talents, abilities you and I have. If we don't have a transformed mind and our love's not genuine, it doesn't matter what we do. And they had all things in common. What does that mean? Well, do you think there were ever any disagreements in that group? Yeah. Of course, they're human. Right? But guess what? I'm sure the person that had a knack or orientation towards mercy with cheerfulness was the one that would come aside a couple of people and say, listen, hey, there's no need for this. Don't you know what you have in common? Don't you know what you have in common? All right, let's focus on that. You think that's a possibility? I do. I think that's a possibility. And so notice in verse 45, it's not just that they were focused on the apostles' teaching and being together. Notice in verse 46 or verse 45, and they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as they had need. They looked out for each other. They looked out for each other's needs. Now, it's not like this hypothetical. Joel and pick on you if that's all right. It's not like I was going over to Joel and I said, hey, I'm a couple bucks short. Can you give me like $6 so I can go play the lotto? That's not looking out for one another's needs, right? That's not what this is talking about. Or me going to Mike and saying, hey Mike, I'm a couple bucks short. Can you spare me some money so I can go get a Lamborghini? That's not looking out for each other's needs. That's saying, hey, I want this, can you help me out? Or could you buy it, right? So there's a difference there. And day by day, they attended the temple together, breaking bread in their homes. They received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God, and having favor with all people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. So another thing about the fellowship, about the church and the functioning of the church is a focus both on the inward, right? But notice what the end of that section says. They had favor, right? They had a good reputation with who? All the people. All the people that came in contact with them. They're like, you know what? Maybe I disagree with them, but I like him as a person. Couldn't necessarily say that about your average Roman soldier or pagan, right? Because if you, I would encourage you, for the most part, to at some point go and look at some of the things that took place on the street in first century Rome. And you'll find very quickly that to have favor with all men was a high accomplishment, given the nature of that society. And I would say that one of the best ways in which the church functions after being unified inwardly is the ability to connect and engage and have favor with people on the outside. How can I have favor? How can I convert somebody on the outside if they think I'm a jerk? If they think I don't care? If they think I'm not loving? It's impossible. And we see this with Jesus in his ministry. Even people that disagreed with Jesus. Jesus approached the Pharisees and the Sadducees and talked to them. Why? Hoping that he could break through to them. He even tells them, I wish that I could gather you up like a hen gathers her chicks. What's my goal? I wish that we could have that type of relationship. But we can't. Why? Not because I won't allow it, but because you won't allow it. And that's the focus here also when we talk about the organization and the organism known as the church. We should be like those people. We want to gather people, right, within our association like a hen gathers her chicks. And the reason that doesn't happen shouldn't be because we've disallowed it. It should be because the other person's rejected it. It should be because the other person... Go ahead, Shannon.
Scripture, if at all possible, as much as depends on you, my peace, and everyone, especially those that are in the household of faith. And I think about, let your good deeds be seen by others so that it may bring glory to God.
Absolutely.
Just hand in hand.
They are. Let your good deeds be seen by people so that it may bring glory to God. Let me ask you a question about the mission work that we support in India. Let me just ask you a question. And I don't necessarily know that I have an answer to it. How are they baptizing all those people? How are they baptizing all those people? How are they baptizing Muslims and Hindus? Like every day? How are they doing it? Huh? They're teaching them. How else are they doing it? You think they got favor with those people? Do those people sit down and talk to them? I think to a degree they do. I mean, think about it. In order to get somebody in that area who's a Muslim to sit down and have a conversation about Jesus seems near impossible. But you can't do that without having a good reputation with that person. Go ahead. Now, this is how, real quick, this is how they do it. This is how they do it. Because Manny tells me. Manny is a doctor. And on the extension of their school or near their school, they run a free clinic that's supported by brothers and sisters from the States. And so what happens? The Muslim comes in scared out of their mind, but it's the only clinic in the area. Scared out of their mind that a Christian might do something to them. And say, hey, we got a surgery that needs to be done. We don't have anywhere else to go. We understand that you're Christian, we're Muslim, but we need help. What does Manny do? Manny's the director of the hospital too. He goes, set him up for surgery. Set him up for surgery. Because think about it. You've got a situation between Pakistan and India where Hindus and Muslims, all they do is fight. Christians are usually caught in the middle. And so what are they seeing? They're seeing something in the Christians that would accept somebody different that they're not seeing between the Muslims and the Hindus. And so they gain their favor through that. And then they say, hey, whenever you're recovered, or while you're in recovery, can we just talk? And notice what it says at the end of the scripture. It says, praising God and having favor with all people, the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. Because the church was functioning as an organism that wasn't about necessarily an individual. It was about individuals. Go ahead, Rick.
Last year, we actually helped 3 different ones, groups in India.
Okay.
Been around and they had other stuff where we bring Green Haven, Alabama, and we go through them. But we get a bulletin from each one of them, and something like that. But each, it's all the same, they're all successful.
Mhm.
Very successful. And then this last one I got, the guy said, working at Green Haven, Alabama, he said, he was talking about, he said, he compared India to where the United States was in 1700s, 1800s. We were doing the same thing here in this country.
Mhm.
He said, if we decline, they're going up.
Yeah.
You compare that, what's going on now, to 1700s, 1800s here.
Absolutely. And it comes back to the principles that are seen in Romans chapter 12 and Acts chapter 2. And so the question that I want us to end on is this question right here. Am I focused on me, the individual, or am I focused on being a part of individuals? And there's another question, second question. What's your spiritual gift? Do you know how to answer it? What are you good at? Take what you're good at and orient that towards the work of the church. And you'll be surprised what you accomplish as an individual and what we can accomplish as individuals. Let's think about that now as we stand and as we stand.